Hey, what's up, guys? This is Mansplaining Mike with the Mansplaining Mike Show where wokeness comes to die. And today, we're going to take a look at some media weaponization, how it was weaponized against Donald Trump in some cases, and then we're going to take a look at what would happen if it was weaponized against you or I, and just take a look at some normal cases that are going on that get a lot of media attention. We're actually going to focus on the Bryan Kohberger case. Not because I'm saying he's innocent or anything like that. Don't take it wrong. Just because I think the media is being weaponized in a way that it shouldn't be. And that he's not really going to have a fair shot at trial. Whether he's innocent or guilty. He deserves the opportunity to be able to defend himself. And in America, you're innocent until proven guilty. And that's something we need to realize, guys. In Donald Trump's case, a crime he was accused of, he was actually just a victim. He was the victim of an extortion attempt in the Stormy Daniels case, but they hit him with a bunch of felonies for being a victim. And we're going to cover how that is exactly, too. I mean, if you think about it, if somebody comes and asks you for hush money or holds information over your head in order to get a payment of hush money, that means they were extorting you. You were just a victim of an extortion. They're trying to hold information over your head that could be considered embarrassing or potentially harmful. And they hold that information over your head and demand a payment to keep silent. That's what happened to Donald Trump. That's what hush money is. You're paying somebody to be quiet and keep quiet about an event that they came to you that they perceived as being harmful that they want to hold over your head. That's a crime. That's a felony, what she did. That's an extortion attempt. Paying it off would be paying hush money. But that's not illegal. It's not illegal to pay somebody hush money when they're extorting. You're the victim of a crime. Anyway, guys, first we'll take a look at what Malcolm X said would happen with the weaponization of the media. I don't agree with him on a lot of stuff, like he really disliked white people at the beginning. I think later on he started really liking white people. But there's a lot of things he said I disagree with. This one I just happen to agree with him on, guys. So let's take a look at what he said.
The media is the most powerful entity on earth. They have the power to make the innocent guilty and to make the guilty innocent, and that's power, because they control the minds of the masses.
Yeah, guys, and that's what they did. They were telling everybody Donald Trump was guilty of a crime. Nobody even cared what the crime they were accusing him of was. They just agreed that he had to be guilty because the media said so. Let's take a listen to what Thomas Massey has to say. This is more reason why we can't look at what Donald Trump did as an actual felony. I mean, there was a felony involved and he was the victim. But anyway, guys, let's see what Thomas Massey has to say about the situation.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Jordan. It's amazing construction of some kind of crime here, but when we dig down to the bottom of it and try to find out what the underlying crime is, I don't think that's been discussed enough, or what the supposed underlying crime is. One of the propositions was that hush money should be reported as a campaign finance expense. Okay, if somebody pays their attorney to seal divorce records because they may be going to run for office or they are running for office, Mr. Trainer, is that a campaign finance expense? Is that something you see on campaign finance reports?
That is not. It is something that you would see. Legal fees are often reported, and it has been the tradition at the commission in looking at those legal fees that we don't question what the attorney-client privilege between the candidates and the lawyer are of what's needed in those particular circumstances.
So let me use another example. In 1999, Bill and Hillary Clinton bought a house in New York, obviously influenced the election of the Senate race there in New York because they moved into the House so that she could run for Senate. Is that a campaign finance expense? Is everything that could influence a campaign finance expense?
Well, under Mr. Bragg's interpretation, it would be, but under normal campaign finance law, it would not be. There are distinct similarities here between the John Edwards prosecution in 2008, where he paid over $1 million to his mistress to keep her quiet, and was prosecuted by the Department of Justice for that and was ultimately acquitted on one count and had a mistrial on all 5 counts. because the jury was given a correct charge as to what the federal law was. In this particular case, the jury was given an incorrect jury charge as to what the law is, and they come out with a completely opposite ruling.
I asked my campaign finance treasurer if I could pay my wife $10,000. She's got more dirt on me than anybody else, and then report that as a campaign finance expense. And he's very fastidious. He manages the finances of at least a dozen different campaigns. And he looked at me like I was crazy. Yet, isn't that sort of the same theory that Alvin Bragg had here? That something like that could be reported as a campaign finance expense?
It's very similar to what's happened here.
So, Congress has paid over $17 million in hush money for sexual misconduct inside of the offices in these buildings. And what's more is that was taxpayer money, right? The allegation is that President Trump paid $130,000 of his own money. But here in Congress, there may be some on this dais.
And he was supposed to be able to do that. That's not illegal. You're supposed to pay that type of stuff off out of your own money. That wasn't a campaign finance. That was finances to keep him from being embarrassed in the public eye. He's supposed to be able to do that. There's nothing illegal about paying it. There's something illegal about asking for it.
I'm for turning loose all of these records. Who in here has had the taxpayer pay for their sexual misconduct charges the hush money? I bet there's some over there. There may be some over here. I don't know, but I do know it's taxpayer money, and I do know not a single penny of it has been turned in as a campaign finance expense. Is the FEC going to investigate the $17 million that Congress has paid to settle, behind closed doors these sexual misconduct allegations?
Congressman, if a complaint were to come to us about it, I'm sure it would be thoroughly investigated.
I might file one because it seems like anybody could do this. But let me just ask this. Is this verdict going to be vacated? Attorney General Bailey, what do you think?
It absolutely should be.
On what grounds?
Numerous grounds. I think the 5 grounds I laid out in my opening statement provide sufficient justification to undermine the credibility of the conviction. I think there are additional grounds as well, but I think that the constitutional violations, the due process violation, the jury unanimity, Sixth Amendment problem alone, the gag order is violative of the First Amendment. The prosecutorial misconduct, the conviction is replete with legal error.
Ms. Foley, do you think this is going to be vacated, this verdict?
I do, and I think eventually it's going to be reversed based on legal grounds rather than mixed questions of fact and law. So some of the evidentiary issues, some of the bias issues, I think they're more difficult to win on appeal because the appellate courts owe deference on these evidentiary determinations of trial judges. Bias is very difficult to win on appeal because the judge has so much latitude in deciding whether to recuse himself. That's why the due process errors are so critical here, because obviously due process errors are questions of law. They get de novo standard of appellate review. The appellate courts owe absolutely no deference whatsoever.
So the irony here is this is going to be vacated, and this trial was all about trying to influence an election, using the process as the punishment. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit for the record 3 documents. One is entitled FEC Drops Investigation into Trump Hush Payments. This is from 3 years ago. I'd like to introduce a document. Congress has paid $17 million in sexual misconduct and discrimination settlements. This was in Axios in 2017. And my third and final document I'd like to introduce is from CNN. Congress paid out $17 million in settlements. Here's why we know so little about that money. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.
That's crazy, isn't it? So it's not illegal when other Congress members do it, but it's illegal when Donald Trump does it. That's called a double standard. And I think the reason that it even went as far as it did was the media manipulation. The media is always manipulated against Donald Trump. That's why I thought this was a good example to get into before we look at what happens when it's weaponized in real life. But anyway, guys, let's get into this and see the weaponization of the media that was happening at CNN, or at least some of it anyway.
All right, well, the media is melting down about how handily President Trump was able to win the Iowa caucus this week. And instead of trying to figure out why did he win so handily? Why do so many people who could be viewers of our show, right? This is the media speaking. Instead, they're just insulting them, saying, if you voted for Trump, you're stupid, you don't live on planet Earth. Also, you're selfish and you're probably a white Christian male. And that inherently makes you selfish. It's pretty amazing. Now, I say this.
And racist.
Yes,
Yeah.
that goes without saying.
Yeah.
I say this as a former card-carrying member of the liberal media, who also myself was very shocked and disappointed when Trump won in 2016. And I remember feeling like, oh, did the media give him too much time? Was it our fault as the media, right? Instead of thinking, what do these people see in him? What does he give them, right? Instead of having any humility about what other people think, you know, they're thinking, well, we know better, but these people are just too stupid. And it's infuriating to watch it. Watch Rachel Maddow say that what we...
Yeah, isn't that crazy, guys? They get paid because we watch their shows or whatever. Or at least the people who do watch their shows are the reason that these people are getting paid. But they think you're all stupid. They're right about the ones who actually watch the shows. They fall for anything. I think they're on like their 9th booster vaccine or something like that. I don't know. It's crazy. They believe every nonsensical thing the media says to them.
We are seeing here is the rise of authoritarianism. And she says it with a straight face. She means it.
And the big picture takeaway from that, and I don't mean to be, again, too dark, as you said, on this, but it is not, if we are worried about the rise of authoritarianism in this country, we are worried about potential rise of fascism in this country. If we're worried about our democracy falling to an authority.
I honestly don't think they know the definition of what those words mean. I mean, Rachel Maddow, she's insane. I mean, just listen to what she's saying. Fascism, dictatorship. All those type of words don't describe Donald Trump at all. In fact, he wants the federal government to have less power over you, which is why he put in place so many deregulations. I mean, that's what they're mad about, that he's getting rid of a lot of the red tape that'll make it easier for small businesses to be able to do better. Not only that, anyway, guys, let's take a look at what's going on here, where RFK Jr. and Elizabeth Warren fiercely clash. And when you listen to what's actually being said, you can see that they're trying to weaponize their voice against him. They're saying things that are untrue. They're doing it in a way to try to turn the public against them. And guys, this is what the media does. They tell people, oh, he doesn't want you to get any vaccines, not even the ones that work. I mean, honestly, I don't think any of them work, but according to the science, some of them do. So let's take a look at what's being said, whether or not you think the government is trying to lie to us and manipulate us. And we can see it in the media all the time. All you got to do is turn on CNN. They parrot the points that these people say. So let's get into this, guys, and see what we think.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Kennedy, I want to start with something that I think you and I agree on, and that is that Big Pharma has too much power in Washington. You've said that President Trump asked you to, quote, clean up corruption and conflicts. Sounds great. You've said that you will, quote, slam shut the revolving door between government agencies and the companies they regulate. That also sounds great. So here's an easy question. Will you commit that when you leave this job, you will not accept compensation from a drug company, a medical device company, a hospital system, or a health insurer for at least 4 years, including as a lobbyist or a board member?
Can you just repeat the last part of the question? Can I commit?
You're not going to take money from drug companies in any way, shape, or form.
Who? Me?
Yes, you.
Oh. Yeah, I'm happy to commit to that.
Okay, good. That's what I figured. I said it's an easy question to start with.
Do you really think they're trying to give him any money? I mean, honestly, he's the only one who's coming out saying that they need to be restricted a little bit. I don't think they want to give Kennedy any type of money, and I'm pretty sure he's going to bring that up too, guys.
And I think you're right on this.
I don't think any of them want to give me money, by the way.
Let's keep going. You're right because to say yes, because every American has the right to know that every decision you make as our number one health officer is to help them and not to make money for yourself in the future. So I want to talk more about money. I'm looking at your paperwork right now. In the past 2 years, you've raked in $2.5 million from a law firm called Wisner Baum. You go online, you do commercials to encourage people to sign up with Wisner Baum to join lawsuits against vaccine makers. And for everyone who signs up, you personally get paid. And if they win their case, you get 10% of what they win. So if you bring in somebody who gets $10 million, you walk away with $1 million. Now, you just said that you want the American people to know you can't be bought, your decisions won't depend on how much money you could make in the future, you won't go to work for a drug company after you leave HHS, but you and I both know there's another way to make money. So, Mr. Kennedy, will you also agree that you won't take any compensation from any lawsuits against drug companies?
So basically, they want to make sure that Kennedy isn't going to join in on any lawsuits against these vaccine makers. That's horrible. I mean, we need people like Kennedy to be joining these lawsuits and try to control what's going on. This idea that things aren't going to be fair for the big corporations, that's a bunch of crybaby stuff we don't really want to hear as Americans. We want to be safe. We want to make sure that our children are going to be safe and healthy and that they're going to be able to reproduce one day so that we can have grandkids and great-grandkids if you live long enough. What she wants to do is make sure that these vaccine agencies have blanket immunity. They don't care if they kill people. They just want to make sure they don't lose any money when they do.
While you are secretary and for 4 years afterwards.
Well, I'll certainly commit to that while I'm secretary. But I do want to clarify something because you're making me sound like a shill. I put together that case. I did the Science Day presentation to the judge on that case to get it into court without a hearing.
Mr. Kennedy, it's just a really simple question.
Yeah.
You've taken in $2.5 million. I want to know if you will commit right now that not only will you not go to work for drug companies, you won't go to work suing the drug companies and taking your rake out of that while you're a secretary and for 4 years after. It's just...
Oh, please don't sue the drug companies. I thought Elizabeth Warren and them were supposed to be against the drug companies a while back. What happened? Now they love the drug companies? Or did they all along? I wonder how many kickbacks this lady gets from the drug companies. I bet you it's a lot.
I'll commit to not taking any fees from drug companies while I'm secretary.
No, I'm asking about fees from suing drug companies. Will you agree not to do that?
You're asking me to not sue drug companies,
No,
and I'm not going to agree to that,
drug
Senator.
companies as much as you want.
I'm not going to agree to not sue drug companies or anybody.
So let's do a quick count here of how, as Secretary of HHS, if you get confirmed, you could influence every one of those lawsuits. Well, let me start the list. You could publish your anti-vaccine conspiracies, but this time on U.S. government letterhead, something a jury might be impressed by. You could appoint people to the CDC vaccine.
Notice how she ignored what he said. He said, well, I won't be doing it for my 4 years as secretary. Isn't that what she wanted? She wants to make sure he doesn't even do it for 4 years after he's secretary with the information that he has and what he learns about what's going on. Again, she's trying to make things fair for the people who are trying to kill us. That's not her job. Her job is to protect the Constitution of the United States, not try to protect corporations. That's not what she was sent there to do. That's not what we voted for her to do.
Panel who share your anti-vax views and let them do your dirty work. You could tell the CDC vaccine panel to remove a particular vaccine from the vaccine schedule. You could remove vaccines from special compensation programs, which would open up manufacturers to mass torts. You could make more injuries eligible for compensation even if there is no causal evidence. You could change vaccine court processes to make it easier to bring junk lawsuits. You could turn over FDA data to your friends at the law firm and they could use it however it benefited them. You could change vaccine labeling. You could change vaccine information rules. You could change which claims are compensated in the vaccine injury compensation program. There's a lot of ways that you can influence those future lawsuits and pending lawsuits while you are Secretary of HHS. And I'm asking you to commit right now that you will not take a financial stake in every one of those lawsuits so that what you do as Secretary will also benefit you financially down the line.
I'll comply with all the ethical guidelines.
That's not the question. You have said
you're asking me.
So he says he's going to comply with all the ethical obligations, and for some reason the Constitution and the obligations set forth in our laws, those aren't good enough for her. What about all the money she's getting? She's turning her back on the people, taking all these buy-offs from these drug companies. How many people do you guys actually know who want to shoot up dangerous vaccines? I mean, yeah, sure, it's some people with blue hair and orange hair and all that type of stuff that dye their hair. I'm not talking about people that have orange hair naturally. But I'm just talking about these people are weird. Green hair, purple hair. They do weird things. And those are the people that they want to protect. The rights for them to shoot stuff up in their veins. And I mean, that's fine if you choose to do it, but we got to get rid of the mandatory vaccinations. The ones that kids have to have just to go to school. I mean, who is the school to tell us how we need to raise our kids or what we need to put in their body? It's absolutely ridiculous, guys.
You're asking me not to sue vaccine pharmaceutical companies. Yeah, you are. That's exactly what you're doing.
No, look, No one should be fooled here. As Secretary of HHS, Robert Kennedy will have the power to undercut vaccines and vaccine manufacturing across our country. And for all of his talk about
yeah, no one should be fooled. She's being bought off by the pharmaceutical company, and you can see how hard she's going to bat for these billionaires and these big companies who would put money in her pocket.
follow the science and his promise that he won't interfere with those of us who want to vaccinate his kids, the bottom line is the same. Kennedy can kill off access to vaccines and make millions of dollars while he does it. Kids might die, but Robert Kennedy can keep cashing in.
Senator, I support vaccines. I support the childhood schedule. I will do that. The only thing I want is good science, and that's it.
How about then say you won't make money off what you do as Secretary of HHS?
Before we go to Senator...
she's making money sitting there right there. She's making money right when she's talking. Those agencies have paid her a lot of money to get up there and act outraged that Kennedy wants to make the vaccine schedule safer for kids. I think it needs to be completely eliminated. What part of freedom is the government telling you what you got to put in your kid's body? How does that sound free to y'all?
Tillis, I think it would be important for me to make it very clear that Mr. Kennedy has gone through the same Office of Government Ethics process as every single other nominee in the Finance Committee this year and in previous administrations. In addition to listing his assets, including the items that you've identified, he has signed an ethics letter that has been reviewed by the Office of Government Ethics concerning any possible conflict in light of its functions and the nominee's proposed duties. And we have a letter from the Office of Government Ethics that he hasn't complied completely with all applicable laws and regulations governing conflicts of interest.
Mr. Chairman, point of information here. Have we had a single nominee come through who's made $2.5 million off suing one of the entities that it would be regulating? And
oh no, he's going to regulate the pharmaceutical industry and tell them they can't put things in your kid's body that shouldn't be there. Or tell them, hey, you at least got to give the real information and give people the choice on what they want to do. That outrages this lady. That outrages all of the Democrats. The fact that you'll have a choice.
Plans to keep getting a tape of every lawsuit in the future? Have we had that before?
I haven't reviewed the past documentation of every other nominee's financial interests, and so no. But I know that every single time we get a nominee, their financial interests are attacked. That's why we have the Office of Government Ethics. That's why they've reviewed everything that's in his record, and that's why he has even, I think, and I don't know that I want to ask him to get into it, but he has listed his assets and has gone through a discussion of the responsibilities under our ethics laws and has complied with all of those requirements.
But those laws aren't good enough when a Republican is involved. They don't get the same rules that the Democrats have to follow. They get a different set of them. Here's Trump and how they had to make sure that he was sentenced to a discharge, which they know that he wasn't guilty of anything, but they wanted to leave those felonies on his record. So the little weird liberals with the blue hair and all the tattoos all over their faces, they could jump on here and tell you guys that Trump's a felon. You shouldn't vote for Trump. He's a felon, guys. He's a felon. Even though he's just a victim of a crime that they put a felony on his record for. But let's see how they couldn't even send him to jail or put him on probation because they knew it wasn't right.
Let me put this question to you, Professor Turley, because there seems to be a consensus among the three of you that there is plenty of potentially reversible error that was committed during the Trump trial. Yet, in the New York court system, Trump has pretty much gotten locked out of all of his petitions to either have the case thrown out or delayed or sentencing delayed or whatever. What makes you believe that he could prevail on appeal given his track record with the New York court system, which a lot of people believe is politically allied against him?
Well, very few people have high expectations at this point for the New York legal system, and it hurts me to say that because I've had a great respect for that system for many years, as has many others. But there's also a problem in these interlocutory appeals. They kept on taking these three-point shots mid-trial, shortly after the verdict. Those are always disfavored. And so the chances of prevailing are not high. You have a better chance once the case itself has been appealed, but also eventually this will go to the Supreme Court. And the key is escaping the vortex that is the New York court system.
So we should point out that court is over. The sentence has been imposed, an unconditional discharge. And as we...
That's how a lot of things go in the appeals process. Like you got to appeal in the state Supreme Court first, and a lot of those judges, they'll be one-sided too. Gotta wait until you get in front of a federal judge a lot of time before you get like a real show. Let's take a look at this. This is some more government weaponization of the media, it seems. I mean, the media is always lying and trying to push that Russia stuff and all of that. I mean, it's really ridiculous, guys. But let's keep going through this until we get to that Kohberger video so we can discuss that and see what we think, though. Let's see what
So the media has it out for President Trump. There are some new eye-opening statistics to support that. The Media Research Center has been closely monitoring coverage on the evening newscast on ABC, CBS, and NBC. The reporting on the president has been 91% negative over the past 3 months. Here's Mr. Trump's response to that. Wow. More than 90% of fake news media coverage of me is negative, with numerous forced retractions of untrue stories. Hence, my use of social media, the only way to get the truth out. Much of mainstream media has become a joke. No newsflash that the media has it out for President Trump.
It's ridiculous, isn't it? 90% negative coverage of one man. Just weaponized. Completely weaponized to make Donald Trump seem like he's evil or like he did something wrong. It's absolutely ridiculous. They do it a lot of the time to make it seem like the Israelis are victims. And people just sit there and buy into it and feel bad for people who are really victimizing others, guys. I mean, it's just ridiculous. Now, this is Melania Trump talking about how ridiculous it is, and I think she did a great job, guys. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below.
You know, it's interesting how quiet and everything became, all of the mainstream media. There were a few days reporting about July 13 event, and everything then became quiet. So I had a lot of questions. What's going on? This is not normal. And is it really shocking that all this egregious violence goes against my husband? Especially that we hear the leaders from the opposition party and mainstream media branding him as a threat to democracy, calling him vile names. They only fueling a toxic atmosphere and giving power all of these people that they want to do harm to him. This needs to stop. This needs to stop. The country needs to unite. And I encourage everybody to read my letter that I wrote on July 14 again, because that cannot continue.
Yeah, I mean, it got to stop, guys, and they're still
it's interesting.
The same thing. They're still trying to say Trump is a Nazi or Trump is Hitler, Trump's a dictator, Trump wants to get us into wars. Trump was the most peaceful president we've had for a long time. I mean, he started 0 new wars, but everybody, all they want to talk about is how Trump is a Nazi and how he's going to get us into World War III. When we see that's what the Democrats have been shooting for. They wanted us in war with Russia. I think they still do. Here we're going to hear Billy Bush talking to Tucker Carlson about some of the mainstream media weaponization and lies that they tell. So let's take a look at this, guys, and see what we think.
Context. You said this was the beginning of Trump derangement syndrome. Did you sense that at NBC?
Oh, God. They absolutely. I mean, anything. Remember this, over at ABC News, they did, at the same time, when Trump became president, they built a 75-person investigative unit. I know the guy who was head of it, dedicated.
Yeah, it's crazy, guys. You can hear people from the media coming forward talking about how they were weaponized against Donald Trump. And here's Trump facing backlash for racist and sexist rhetoric. Let's just be honest. Donald Trump isn't sexist or racist at all, especially not in comparison. Like if we compared him to Joe Biden, who the media loved and adored and acted like he was some type of a black supremacist or something like that, Joe Biden voted no on desegregation. He didn't want black people inside of his kids' schools. In fact, he had gave a speech talking about how those people wanted to like steal from his daughter and rape his mother or something like that. It was pretty crazy. He was dropping M-bombs all inside of the Congress. I mean, there's examples like that. And then, of course, he wrote the 1994 crime bill, which put a lot of nonviolent black men inside of the system. So, I mean, if you want to talk about racism, let's talk about that. Or how about the fact that Joe Biden doesn't even know what a woman is? I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. He thinks men who are cross-dressing make better women than women. I mean, think about it. He made a cross-dressing male the health secretary of the United States. And then he made him an admiral even though the guy was never in the Navy. I mean, it was absolutely insane. Why isn't that sexist? Saying that men make better women than women. I mean, to me, that's sexist. But anyway, guys, let's get into this and hear about how Donald Trump is so racist and sexist. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Welcome to the News Hour. We are now in the final full week before Election Day, and there's no clear indication of who has the edge in the race for the White House.
Former President Trump.
They knew Donald Trump was smashing that lady. That was crazy. They kept saying it was a tight race. It was a blowout. She didn't win any swing states. Donald Trump won them all.
Vice President Harris and their running mates each campaigned at full throttle in swing states today. Much of their focus was on controversial remarks made by speakers at a Trump rally last night. Laura Barone-Lopez starts our coverage.
On her way to campaign in battleground Michigan today, Vice President Kamala Harris denounced recent rhetoric from former President Donald Trump and his allies.
He is focused and actually fixated on his grievances, on himself, and on dividing our country.
Nobody divided the country more than the Democrats. They were calling all Trump supporters Hitler and Nazis and racists and white supremacists. But somehow, Trump was the one dividing the country, guys. That just doesn't make any sense. We went through this for the last 4 years. We went through this for 4 years when Trump was president. And we went for it for 2 or 3 years before Trump became the president the first time when he announced that he was going to run. I mean, we've been hearing this stuff for the longest time, and none of it ever comes true. All of these horror stories they paint on the walls that Donald Trump is going to do this and do that. None of it comes true. In fact, black unemployment was at an all-time low under Donald Trump. Unemployment was at an all-time low under Donald Trump. All of it is ridiculous. The First Step Act that Donald Trump made was to make sure that there wasn't racism in the government.
And it is not in any way something that will strengthen the American family, the American worker.
She was referring to a massive Trump rally at Madison Square Garden in New York yesterday, where a racist remark about Puerto Rico made headlines.
There's literally a floating...
He's a comedian. He was telling a joke. It's crazy. Donald Trump didn't say it. The comedian did.
Island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. Yeah. I think it's called Puerto Rico.
That comment made by comedian and Trump supporter Tony Hinchcliffe sparked major backlash from politicians and celebrities alike, including Puerto Rican megastars Bad Bunny and Jennifer Lopez. Trump's team tried to distance itself from the comment. His senior campaign advisor telling the NewsHour in a statement, "This joke does not..."
Nobody takes J-Lo serious. She was crying that Kamala didn't win, or crying that Kamala wasn't going to win, just crying in general. I think it was more because she's going to be brought up on charges with that diddler thing, alleged. Well, let's keep going, guys.
Reflect the views of President Trump or the campaign. But the campaign did not distance itself from other remarks made by multiple Trump allies who hurled racist and sexist attacks at Vice President Harris.
She's a fake, a fraud, she's a pretender. Her and her pimp handlers will destroy our country. She is the devil, whoever screamed that out. She is the Antichrist. She's just so impressive. As the first Samoan Malaysian...
Hey, they're talking about just her. They're not talking about all of her supporters. That's what they were doing. They said all the Trump supporters were white supremacists, Nazi phobes.
Low IQ, former California prosecutor ever to be elected president.
In a speech billed as his closing message, the former president himself again labeled fellow American citizens as enemies.
They're smart and they're vicious, and we have to defeat them. And when I say the enemy from within, the other side goes crazy, becomes a sound. Oh, how can he say No, they've done very bad things to this country. They are indeed the enemy from within. But this is who we're fighting.
At one point, Trump appeared to suggest that he and House Speaker Mike Johnson have a secret that will help Republicans keep their House majority.
I think with our little secret, we're going to do really well with the House, right? Our little secret is having a...
And they did well. Trump was right again.
Big impact. He and I have a secret. We'll tell you what it is when the race is over.
Though most of Trump's remarks were light on policy, the former president announced support for a tax credit for people taking care of sick family members, providing little detail.
President Trump.
After casting his early vote ballot in Delaware, President Joe Biden called the Trump event.
He walks like a broken robot, like he's all robotic and stuff, but he's not moving even as fast as a robot would. Joe Biden's walk is hilarious. I wonder if it's even a real person. I wonder what's under that. I'm not telling anybody to go out and test it. I'm just joking. I mean, I'm sure he's a real clone or something.
And simply embarrassing.
It's beneath any president, but that's what we're getting used to. That's why this election is so important.
Trump defended his Madison Square Garden rally while campaigning in Atlanta today.
So last night we had a great rally at Madison Square Garden. And sometimes I'll use a little bit, not hard foul, but soft foul. We call it soft foul. But, you know, to emphasize something about somebody's capabilities or whatever I might be talking about.
Senator J.D. Vance dismissed the backlash to the comedian's racist joke about Puerto Ricans before heading to a rally tonight in Racine, Wisconsin.
He's married to a minority, but they still call him a Nazi. He has a beautiful Indian wife. She looked really nice, didn't she, guys? But they still call him a racist. He's married to somebody who's brown. How would J.D. Vance be a racist?
I haven't seen the joke. Maybe it's a stupid racist joke, as you said. Maybe it's not. I haven't seen it. I'm not going to comment on the specifics of the joke. But I think that we have to stop getting so offended at every little thing in the United States of America. I'm so over it.
Meanwhile, at stops in Michigan today, Harris visited a semiconductor plant and touted some 1,300 new manufacturing jobs coming to the town of Saginaw. It's the latest in a...
None of that happened. No new jobs came to Michigan as far as I know under the Democrats. Some of them came back. That's about it.
String of swing state events focused on her economic proposals.
I'm going to create basically an opportunity economy task force for Puerto Rico.
Minnesota Governor Tim Walz addressed manufacturing workers this morning in Manitowoc.
Kamala Harris and I have a plan to build the American industrial strength powered by American workers.
An ABC News Ipsos poll released this weekend shows Harris with a slight edge nationally.
They were lying to us during all of that. Like I said, Trump won every single swing state. He won most of the states. Like, she only won like the super blue communist states, like California, that everybody knew she was going to win. She didn't do much of anything at all in the end. So it's kind of crazy just to see, looking back, how much of a gap they had gave her. They gave her a 4% gap. Usually they say the margin of error is 3%. So even with that gap, they were trying to say that she was going to win. She didn't come close to winning.
Indicating she's the preferred candidate among 51% of likely voters, compared to 47% for Trump. Polling averages continue to show an extremely tight race as we close in on Election Day.
All of those
For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Laura Barone.
Now, we're going to take a look at this quote from Malcolm X one more time right before we get into this video of Bryan Kohberger. Now, again, I'm not saying the guy is innocent, guys. I just want to take a look at it. And I would do a little bit with the legal system. I'm always filing it, challenge unconstitutional laws and stuff like that. I do a pretty good job, I think, anyway. You guys will see in the future whether or not I win or lose this next one. I'll let you know. I can't talk too much about it because, well, I'm still in court, so it wouldn't be a good idea. But I'm challenging the red flag laws in Michigan. I'm also challenging these P922G4 laws. Anyway, let's get into this and see what Malcolm X said one more time, and then we'll listen to this Bryan Kohberger evidence from Vinnie Politan. And I just want to hear what they have to say, and when they're talking about the evidence and whether or not the guy is guilty. We'll talk about that. Anyway, guys, let's keep going.
Entity on Earth. They have the power to make the innocent guilty and to make the guilty innocent, and that's power, because they control the minds of the masses.
Yeah, he's right about that, guys. And I'm going to show you exactly why I'm saying it. Because a lot of this evidence, it's not 100% proof that the kid is guilty. But they report it like it is, and they get everybody behind it. Now, I'm not saying this guy is innocent. I'm just saying he should have a fair trial. So we're going to take a look at some of this evidence and see if whether or not we think the media should be reporting it on it the way that they are. I'm not going to talk about whether or not he's actually guilty of doing the crime. We'll just look at whether or not we think this evidence is something that would be enough to make him be found guilty.
I'm Vinnie Politan. The subject of my investigation is the Idaho student murders. 4 lives taken, a desperate search for a killer, and now the most anticipated trial on Court TV. Here's the story. Ethan, Xana, Maddie, and Kaylee were 4 friends living together in an off-campus house at the University of Idaho. They worked hard and were all flourishing as students and having the time of their lives. They were popular, and their house was known as a gathering spot for fellow students. All of them.
And their death is extremely sad. I'm not trying to disrespect what happened to them at all. This doesn't have any reflection on what happened to them. We're just talking about whether or not the media coverage of it is fair. Let's keep going, guys.
Tragically changed in the early morning hours of November 13th, 2022. Those 4 students were stabbed to death inside their home. The brutal crime shook the community and touched the nation, setting off an intense manhunt for a killer. Students were afraid to be alone on campus. Some never came back. Investigators from the Moscow Police Department joined forces with the Idaho State Police and the FBI, following every lead, every tip, and every piece of evidence. That investigation took them across the country to Pennsylvania and led them to this man, a grad student at a neighboring university in Pullman, Washington. This accused mass killer has denied the allegations and claims to have an alibi. Well, now the case is getting closer to trial, and both sides are battling over the evidence the jury will see and hear. Trials are public, okay? Our courtrooms are public. I think you know that, I know that, we all know that. And during the course of a case, the litigation, the going back and forth, each side filing motions, trying to get the other side to do something, trying to exclude evidence, whatever the motion is, these things are all part of the court docket. And when you have high-profile cases or regular cases, most states around the nation do a really good job these days of putting this stuff online. Idaho is one of those states that is really good at this. They have a high-profile case. They're going to put all of the court filings and everything online. I want you to take a look at that docket right now, because you're going to notice something really interesting about it as we watch it. Okay, look really closely. Order to seal, 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 order to seal. They're sealing everything. Not everything, but a lot of things. Like all of these orders to seal evidence and seal motions and seal documents. They've even closed the courtroom doors to have sealed hearings. Now, Court TV, we cover trials all around the country. Primarily murder trials. Everything is serious. Everything is high profile. Florida, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Arizona, California, all over the country. Ohio, South Carolina, Florida, and Florida again. So what is happening here? We saw all of these things are sealed, including some of the hearings in a public case in a public trial, which brings me to the first question in my investigation tonight. Why is everything sealed? Is this normal in Idaho? Is this the way justice is done in Idaho? Is it not as transparent as other states around the nation? Do the people of Idaho and the public not have access to things that are happening inside of their courtrooms? It's unusual for me. So let's get the inside scoop from 2 guys who know Idaho law very well. First, the attorney who represents...
That's an interesting question. I don't know too much about Idaho law, so it's interesting to hear about it. Anyway, let's keep going and see what they had to say.
Represented Chad Daybell. John Pryor is with us. You know him. And trial lawyer and former Idaho Attorney General Dave Leroy is with us. Great to see you guys. I'm glad you're here. You know, I started covering trials in Idaho just recently, and it was, you know, some of the other cases involving Lori Daybell. Dave, let me start with you. Is this normal? Is this usual for Idaho to seal a lot of things from the public, and including having hearings that are sealed from the public?
Well, as your setup suggested, there's nothing very normal about this particular case. And this is an extraordinary amount of sealing going on. But part of that sealing, I presume, is designed by the court and with the concurrence of the parties or the assertion of one party or another that something about this, if revealed pre-jury trial, may have the tendency to taint an objective jury. Much of that sealing, I presume, Benny, is to keep evidence away from you so that you will not be putting it on the national news as one way or another potentially influencing the case. Sealing in Idaho is done on an ad hoc basis, meaning that each party can make a particular application for a particular and specified reason, often in secret, and the judge makes a decision in their best discretion about what the answer is. But I presume that most of this sealing is designed to minimize pretrial publicity and enhance the possibility of finding swiftly and accurately an objective jury.
So, John Pryor, is this unusual in your practice to have this much stuff shielded from the public, including hearings?
Well, I agree wholeheartedly with David. In the general criminal case, general trial, it's highly unusual to have this much sealing. When you're dealing with a case that has a lot of publicity, and this Kohberger case has a tremendous amount of publicity, and in recent years, there's been another case or two that had a lot of publicity. The courts are working very hard at protecting not only witnesses, but evidence from getting out that might influence people prior to they selecting the jury. And that's a lot of what's going on, is that they're doing this to make sure that both parties have a fair opportunity to get an unbiased jury who haven't been exposed to a lot of the information. And really, that's the predominant reason for it, Vinny.
So, Dave, from my perspective, you know, been with Court TV for a long time, longer than any other person at Court TV, by the way. So, from my perspective, all we do is cover high-profile cases, whether it's a local case that's high-profile or national. Cases like O.J. Simpson, Casey Anthony, Jodi Arias. And inevitably, through the years, I mean, these cases are super high-profile. People talk about it from the moment the crime occurs, all the way through, all the litigation, and then to the trial. And what I've noticed through the years is that they always get a jury, number one. And number two, the jury bases their verdict on the evidence. Like, why don't we trust that? Why don't we trust that we have voir dire, that we have jurors who listen to the judge's instructions and base it? I mean, we've been shocked many times, whether it's guilty or not guilty, by juries based on the evidence.
Well, Vinny, remember, I come from the world of politics where we trust but verify. And that verification is often best done up front rather than at the end of the case. It seems to me that we're in this case where we have already had a change of venue due to what the defense successfully advocated was too much pretrial publicity in a small venue like Moscow, Latah County, Idaho, in North Idaho. Now we're moved 300 miles away to the Boise media area. It's better to be safe than sorry. I understand that trying cases in the media is something that we all are allowed to do as citizens, and it's great TV, as your network has successfully projected over the years. But to the extent that we can upfront protect a objective, unbiased jury in a very sensational case, I think it's not inappropriate to do that. The extent to which we're doing that here in Idaho is overwhelming, as you pointed out, but perhaps there's a reason for that. We simply don't know what's behind those seals. And many of those seals are in that list that you projected also were sealed and redacted. So there is likely to be some kind of public or private protection in addition to the public protection behind those particular orders that also have a redaction.
Yeah, and if it's, you know, the safety of someone, I get it, but if it's something else. Now, John, let me read this, because this is the defendant's motion, and it's the defendant's.
See, the thing is, a lot of it is sealed just because they have to hold the integrity for the trial. Like, the court has to have some type of integrity. This guy have to have a chance to defend himself. So certain evidence, if the media had it the way the media is weaponized against defendants, then this kid might have no chance. He probably already has little to no chance. But anyway, guys, let's keep going and see what we think.
To unseal. The suspected killer, by and through his attorneys of record, hereby moves the Honorable Court for an order to unseal the investigative genetic genealogy referred to as Genetic Information, or IGG, suppression briefing and related hearing. Here, the way in which the IGG material is accessed and used is a matter warranting public disclosure and should not be shielded from the public's right to know. So in this scenario, John.
So they want the people to know how they got a hold of this DNA evidence. From what I know, it was from a third party. I'm sure they're going to get into it more on here. And the third party usually advertises that they won't release your DNA evidence or their findings to anybody else without a subpoena. And even under subpoena, they're not supposed to, I think, some of the time. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, they are, in a way, medical records. It's your DNA. And I mean, these third parties should have to respect it. Imagine if you had to use a third party for some type of DNA evidence on whether or not your kid is yours. And you might not want that information to be public. This is just proof that they might not hold their records as private as they claim they are. I'm not saying that they shouldn't do things to help to find criminals. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just telling you what people expect when they sign up for this type of stuff, and in turn what's happening with their expectations. Some people are being disappointed, and a lot of people are really happy that those people are being disappointed because they want to have the evidence turned over so that they can find the guilty party. So I mean, I could see the benefits of both, releasing it and keeping it sealed. But what I do have to point out is that you're taking it with the expectation of privacy, and these people violate your privacy. It's kind of like they went back on a contract, you know. They reneged on a contract.
It is the accused, right? The one who's always worried about, you know, getting a fair trial, who wants something to be unsealed in public. Like, from where I'm sitting, like, then there should be no reason for it to be sealed, especially if the defendant himself is saying, hey, let the public see this.
I agree with that statement. If he's asking for it to be unsealed, and it's his trial, and he wants that evidence out there for everybody to know, they absolutely should. Because there's already all of this evidence pointing towards his guilt. If he thinks this is something that'll be something that points towards his innocence, I think that needs to be put out equally as much as the things that hurt him, at least. There needs to be some reasonable expectation that both sides will be told if you guys are going to talk about it. I think that's something important to point out. Like, if these media companies are going to talk about it, they should get both sides of the story.
Well, Vinny, in this particular case, that's a pure way of looking at that. I have a suspicion that there may be some issues with the evidence that they're trying to attack on the defense side. And there may be some things that might be either embarrassing or inappropriate, or there's been some tampering, or there's a chain of custody issue. And what the defense is probably trying to do, now I haven't looked at the pleadings and I don't have access, but when
that's a good point I didn't make. What about chain of custody? This is a private company. They're not held to the same standards as the government. How do we know that the information they have was sealed properly, was maintained properly, or that this information is even right or accurate? It could have been mixed up. We don't know the chain of custody. They're not held to the standards that the government is.
The defense tries to unseal and say, no, we need to let the entire public see what happened. That's usually a situation in which the defense is trying to gain some ground by suggesting that maybe what the law enforcement and the police did in this case may have been inappropriate in some way. And that's really a lot of what I think is going on. It's my personal opinion. I don't have access to the pleadings, but
you know why? Because they're sealed. They're sealed.
That's right.
They're sealed. All right.
And I'm not a fan of sealing things, and I agree wholeheartedly with David, if I'm understanding him correctly, in that if we're going to have a public trial, let's have a public trial, and let's have an entire public trial. But again, when there's sensitive information that's dealing with people's lives, and there's things that could be either an embarrassment or cause some anguish towards someone, or bring some attention to someone who's not a principal in this case, I understand limited use of the sealing option.
Gotcha. All right, John and Dave are both going to stick around. We're going to need your help again. But that motion mentioned this IGG.
I think it's really important to point out that if these records are going to be sealed, it needs to be sealed in a way to protect the defendant. I know a lot of people will be mad that that's my opinion, but everybody to be able to defend themselves. And if you're sealing information that would make him look innocent, that's hurtful to him. If you're sealing information that would make him look guilty, or that the media might use to make him look guilty, as the media often does, like they did under Donald Trump, then that's a good reason to seal it. As long as you're sealing it with the intention of making it so that the defendant has an opportunity to defend himself.
Coming up next, what is IGG? So for the defense, the big issue is this genetic genealogy and how it all relates to this case. And don't forget, it all comes down to DNA, because on the knife sheath that has been described just like this one at the crime scene, beneath the victims, on this little snap, see, I gotta close the snap. This is where DNA was gathered that they have allegedly connected to the suspect. But you have to remember, take a look at these court documents. These are now from the prosecution. And this was actually, I think, a motion for a protective order. The product of the genealogy conducted by the FBI was family tree that contained the name, birth date, and death date, if applicable, of hundreds of relatives, as well as their familial connections between each other and the suspect, the accused killer. The FBI then sent to local law enforcement, sent a tip to investigate the defendant.
You don't need a warrant to go through the trash if the trash is outside, but if they came into his house to go through the trash in his house, then they would have needed a warrant because he didn't throw it out yet.
DNA, that's what I said, from the snap of the sheath. That comparison indicated the DNA found on the trash belonged to the biological father of the individual who left the DNA on the K-bar knife sheath. Okay, there's a lot there. I don't know how easy or difficult.
So they didn't even get his DNA to compare it to. They're comparing it to his father's DNA. And we still don't know the chain of custody on the original DNA because it was a third party. So it seems like the DNA evidence that might not be able to prove him 100% guilty.
It was to follow, that's why we do the show. Brings us to our next question, because they mentioned the IGG process pointed law enforcement towards the defendant. So here's my question. What is IGG? We got to know what IGG is before we can understand how it pushed them towards the defendant. Joining me, former homicide detective, host of The Interview Room with Chris McDonough. It's Chris McDonough. And top genetic genealogist who's done groundbreaking work in the field that's led to the first convictions and exonerations based on it. CeCe Moore is with us, and that's important. DNA goes both ways on this. It can exonerate you, and it can put you behind bars. All right, CeCe, let me begin with you. Simple question, or is it? What is IGG?
IGG stands for Investigative Genetic Genealogy. We sometimes hear it also referred to as Forensic Investigative Genetic Genealogy. And what it is taking DNA from a crime scene or an unidentified human remains sample and reverse engineering their identity from the distant relatives with whom they share DNA in the genetic genealogy databases. And so what we're generally working with are very distant relatives to these unknown suspects. So none of these tend to have close relatives. It's very rare. We're working with second, third, fourth, fifth cousins and beyond. We are looking for commonalities, overlaps, and ultimately common ancestors. So we can piece together their family tree, this unknown.
Look, I really hope the guy is guilty. I hope they find him guilty. I hope they lock him up. I hope he ends up getting the ultimate punishment. You know, that final solution, because I don't want to have to pay for his meals for the rest of his life. But honestly, using DNA from a distant cousin or something like that, that doesn't sound like it's going to be 100% positive feedback. I mean, like positive results you get back. So, man, it'll be interesting to see. I'm just letting you guys know I don't want you to get your hopes up that the guy's going to be found guilty. And even if he is, a lot of this stuff might be appealable.
Suspect's family tree, bit by bit, based on who they're sharing DNA with, then build forward in time and try to find candidates who descend from those common ancestors who were in the right place at the right time, the right gender, the right age range to potentially be the suspect.
Okay, so just for reviewing, you get the DNA from here, you don't know who it is. So now we go and we do this IgG. You say you're looking for ancestors. You're looking where for these ancestors?
So we have to analyze that DNA evidence from scratch because it's very different than what the crime labs do. We have to create what's called a SNP profile, which is different than the STR genetic markers that they use for evidence in court that the crime labs create. This profile will have hundreds of thousands of genetic markers of this unknown suspect cross his genome, and it is then uploaded into genetic genealogy databases. However, even though over 50 million people have taken direct-to-consumer DNA tests, we are barred from using the largest databases. So we are limited to the databases that are willing to work with law enforcement. And those are the two smallest ones, GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA. So that genetic profile is uploaded there and compared against a couple million people who have opted into allowing law enforcement to compare. However, there is one more database that is vulnerable to law enforcement use, although their terms of service bar it. And that is a company called MyHeritage that is based in Israel. So that one has been used in some cases. And I suspect that may be one of the things that the prosecution would rather stay private. It has been ruled to not be illegal in other cases. It is against the terms of service, though, and it might look bad to the public. So they might be wanting to unseal that to get public opinion behind them.
All right, Chris McDonough. That's it. I'm starting to really understand this, but this is important stuff.
My question is, if the police can send subpoenas to these companies who say it's private for your DNA, would these companies also send your DNA? Could they use it to plant the information? Because the police might not have had your DNA in any other way, or anybody related to your DNA. So could they give it to the police ahead of time, or could they give them the actual samples? That would be interesting to find out.
This is a way to find people that you may not otherwise be able to find.
Yeah, absolutely, Vinny. And I think what the defense is doing here is looking for that aha moment, right? I mean, if it is, let's say it is from MyHeritage database, they're looking for that impact into the public, court of public opinion to say, hey, wait a minute, the cops did something wrong here. Whereas if you do a comparison, it's no different than,
See what they're saying in the court of public opinion. None of this stuff is supposed to be public opinion. You're supposed to have the presumption of innocence until you're found guilty. There's not supposed to be public opinion influence that lawyers have to worry about. But nowadays, that's something they do have to worry about. Doesn't seem like the weaponization of the media is working out good for criminal defendants.
Pulling off a bunch of photographs and put them into a photographic lineup and showing a witness. Because at some point you have to get a warrant to substantiate and tie that suspect together to that DNA.
So Cece, the use of this genealogy of whether you're exonerating or looking for a killer on a hot case, an unsolved case like this, it's the way they describe it is pointing it in the direction. We only have like 20 seconds here, but you usually can't identify the actual person, but you find people that are somehow in their sphere.
Well, actually, pretty often we can point at one person or an immediate family, a set of siblings. It just depends how much data you have to work with. However, it is only used as a tip. It should not be used for the basis of arrest or to compel DNA, which is what the prosecution's argument is they didn't use it as evidence to arrest him or to take this to trial.
It's a piece used to get to the next stage. Okay, CeCe Moore, thank you so much. Chris McDonough is going to stick around. Up next, folks, how did they identify?
So they use the information they get as a way to sidestep and circumvent the way that they're supposed to do it. In other words, they were trying to skip ahead in their police procedures. And there might be a reason that it gets thrown out. I don't know. I don't want that to happen. I hope the guy gets found guilty. I want every murderer to be put away, because our kids have to grow up in this society. And as long as there's murderers walking the streets, the kids will be in danger.
Identify the suspect.
Come.
I'm Benny Politan. We continue our investigation of the Idaho student murders. It's a case that captivated the nation when there was a search for a mass killer. And now the nation is bracing for the biggest trial of 2025. Here's the story. 4 students were brutally murdered in their home near the University of Idaho. Kaylee, Maddie, Ethan, and Xana were great people with amazing futures that were taken away by a monster. The man accused of this horrific crime has denied doing it and has proclaimed his innocence. There is no eyewitness, no confession, and no direct evidence. It's a prosecution built on circumstantial evidence, which prosecutors believe is compelling, including DNA found at the scene of the murder on a knife sheath. Now both sides are battling in the courtroom as the countdown to this 2025 trial continues. Now, a lot of things are sealed in this case. There's a gag order. There's limited access to some of the courtroom proceedings. But when he was first arrested, there was the affidavit, the arrest affidavit that provided a lot of information. Did it provide all the information? I'm not sure. But it provided a lot of information. So I want to go through some key parts of this because I think they're really significant in what we are investigating tonight. We begin with a review of footage from multiple videos obtained from the King Road neighborhood showed multiple sightings of suspect vehicle 1 starting at 3:29 a.m. and ending at 4:20 a.m. After reviewing the numerous observations of suspect vehicle 1, the forensic examiner initially believed that suspect vehicle 1 was a 2011 to 2013 Hyundai Elantra. Upon further review, he indicated it could also be a 2011 to 2016 Hyundai Elantra, right? So your first big piece of evidence in this case was, as we knew, were these videos.
A Hyundai Elantra, that's an extremely affordable car. The color white is the most common color for a car. I mean, because it's usually cheaper. It's usually like the base models. That color will be white. So what they have is an affordable car that a lot of people have, if it's the Hyundai. And the other one, I'm not too sure about. They said, what was it? They thought it was a Hyundai Elantra anyway, and that's what the kid ended up having. But those cars are extremely common. I don't know how you could tie that car to him for sure. Like, you could have pulled over any white Hyundai and said that that was the guilty character. But Just saying, let's keep going, guys. I hope they get a conviction.
Surveillance videos of this white Elantra, and that became, we're looking for the owner, the driver of this white Elantra. Then we read this on November 29th of 2022, at approximately 12:28 a.m., Washington State University police officer Danielle Tiengo queried white Elantras registered at Washington State University. Now, WSU is just a few miles away. It's across the state line, but it's close to Moscow, Idaho. As a result of that query, he located a 2015 white Elantra with a Pennsylvania license plate, LFZ 8649. The vehicle was registered to the accused killer, okay? So when I heard that, to me, it was like, okay, so this is how they figured it all out, right? They figured it out because of this officer decides to take a look at what's happening in his university where he's an officer, Washington State University. Now, more from the affidavit. Law enforcement obtained search warrants to determine cellular devices that utilize cellular towers in close proximity to the King Road residence on November 13th, 2022, between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. This is the time of the quadruple murder. After determining that the suspect was associated to both the 2015 white Elantra and the 8458 phone, investigators reviewed these search warrant returns. A query of the 8458 phone in these returns did not show the 8458 phone utilizing cell tower resources in close proximity to the King Road residence between 3 and 5. There were no hits between 3 and 5.
They're assuming he turned it off because they didn't get the hits. That doesn't sound like much of evidence to me, guys. I mean, the fact that he turned his phone off or it just didn't pick up anywhere, that doesn't mean that he's guilty of anything, and they shouldn't be able to assume that because he turned his phone off that he must be guilty of something. I turn my phone off all the time. It might just be somebody I don't feel like talking to, or maybe I just don't feel like talking to anybody for that day, so I turn my phone off. It's my phone. I pay for it. It comes with the power, but, I mean, come on. This is a little bit ridiculous.
To the next question in my investigation, which is an important one, and I think we've really got to zero in on it. How did they identify their suspect? How did they land on him? What was the piece of information that led them to him? Or did they put information together to get him? How exactly did they do it? Do we have a clear idea of that? Joining us, Chris McDonough, the interview room with Chris McDonough, and retired FBI special agent and expert in criminal investigations, Bobby Chacon. Great to see you both. Now, I want to read a couple of excerpts from a Slate article entitled "How Police Actually Cracked the Idaho Killings Case." According to a law enforcement source familiar with the investigation with whom I spoke, a key reason police focused on this suspect as a likely suspect has to do with something that is never mentioned in the 18-page affidavit that I've just been reading from: forensic genealogy. It was only after investigators utilized a technique reliant on genealogy databases to determine who'd left DNA on a tan leather knife sheath that police requested a search warrant for the accused killer's phone records, according to this source. Up until that point, in late December, he hadn't stood out among all the other Elantra owners, the source said, something that is reinforced by a close, informed reading of the affidavit. So, Bobby Chacon, I'll begin with you. It seems to me that when we all read that affidavit, there was something to read between the lines. And now this has become a big issue in court, which is about this IGG investigative genealogy that is a part of the case. Is that really the key to how they were able to narrow things down and get it to the point where they could go to a judge and get a warrant so they could get his phone records and continue their investigation to identify him as the suspect here?
Yeah, you know, Vinny, I know that IGG is the big sexy thing now, and everybody wants to jump on the bandwagon. And I actually want to, maybe I'm the minority here, but I don't think it is in this case. I think it helped. I think it was I don't think it was the linchpin. I think they were onto this guy. Remember what's not said in this affidavit, which the police did know at this time, is they had already interviewed an eyewitness that saw the suspect leaving the house. They kept that really under wraps. They kept her description of this guy, and how tall he was.
The only thing about that eyewitness is she was extremely traumatized at that time. She was extremely scared, and eyewitness testimony a lot of the time doesn't hold up in court. I mean, they go up there and they get ate up because they don't remember certain details about a person. And that's just the way how the mind works, unless if you're trained for those situations. And I don't think there's too many people who train for situations like that, just in case something like this occurs. Like, you don't go through life thinking there's going to be a double homicide or triple homicide, in this case a quadruple homicide, in a house that you're sleeping in. I mean, that's not something most people prepare for.
The bushy eyebrows, all of that was kept really under wraps for a good reason. So they were doing really good police work, narrowing it down, getting your pool of suspects, Elantra owners in the area, phone records. They were doing the standard stuff that you do in every case. Now, IGG does help. It helps narrow down your suspect pool. It doesn't give you the suspect. It helps you narrow it down, and then it helps you get to the suspect that then you can obtain a DNA. They did a cheek swab eventually and compare it directly to the knife sheath, and then you have the, what I call the 100% match, 5.3 cotillion or whatever it is, octillion. So I think that they did the normal police work. You read the affidavit. I think they would have gotten the warrants without IGG in this case. They would have gotten the warrants for his phone and things like that. I think that it was a big help, but I don't think this case doesn't get made without IGG.
Chris McDonough, so they don't mention the IGG, but it's clearly a part of the case because now there's a motion related to the IGG. A lot of things have been sealed, like we said. Defense wants to unseal it. So do you think they could have gotten to this suspect without the IGG? Was there still enough there? Did this just make it quicker? Because there's a couple steps in the process, right? The IGG gets them quicker to the suspect, but there's still not enough for an arrest. They go to the house in Pennsylvania, they get the father's DNA from the garbage, still not, it's enough for an arrest, but then it's not the positive match until they swab him. So it's like a three-step process with the DNA here. What are your thoughts on the role of the IGG, and was that the linchpin? Bobby doesn't think so. What do you think?
I agree with Bobby. I mean, and just to dovetail into the thought process there, remember when this thing first goes down, there is a massive amount of resources on the ground. And so in any investigation like this, you're going to have a team inside the house. You're going to have a team outside of the house doing like a canvassing, trying to pull video, et cetera, and interviewing witnesses in relationship to neighbors that they hear or see, anything like that. So we don't know just yet how much amount of information they had from the get-go. And when the IGG information shows up, that's kind of like a bonus, right? I mean, that officer that went back and started querying the cars through, the university there and came up with a similar Elantra, well, then you can just pick up the phone and call the FBI, and right away, if you have them on the scene, you got a direct source going there, and that information can accelerate pretty rapidly.
All right, so let's talk about this for a second, Bobby, because the way they're using the IGG is it's not evidence, it's not something that should be used as probable cause for an arrest, but they treat it as a tip. And I've seen people talk about it almost like an anonymous tip, and law enforcement doesn't like to mention it. And I think that's what happened in this case, because it's not in the arrest affidavit. There's no mention of it, and you don't have to mention everything there, but it seems like it played a role here, yet law enforcement doesn't necessarily want that to be part of the record. Why is that, Bobby? Why do you think that is?
I don't know why it is, but my guess is, and just to be clear, IgG has a really big role in some cases, and some cases it's the only thing that leads you to the suspect. So it's very valuable. This is a new area of DNA investigations. It's very valuable. I just happen to think in this particular case, they had the Elantra, they had a Washington State University student registered to a white Elantra that seat, so they were on their way to identifying him. In this case, IgG was kind of a very big help, but it wasn't everything in this case. In some cases, it is. I think they don't want to mention the IgG stuff because remember where it all comes from. It comes from a voluntary database that, Cece mentioned earlier that, not all people dedicate their DNA to this. And the biggest services like the one I'm in, one of the bigger ones, doesn't allow law enforcement to query it. So, when you're dealing, you don't want to make people hesitant to give their DNA into these programs and into these companies because they sensationalize it and they say, oh, the law enforcement's looking at all these people in these databases, and then you get, as a business owner, you wouldn't want that to happen either. You don't want people hesitant to put in.
I mean, maybe you just don't want it because you don't want the government in your business to know everything about you. I mean, there's a lot of reasons you might not want the government to have your DNA. It's not necessarily because you're trying to cover up a crime. I mean, there's a ton of reasons I wouldn't want them to have my DNA. I'm just saying, they could use it to create weapons, destruction in the future or something like that, or to target you or something. There's a lot of reasons you might not want some company to have your DNA.
And so I think like it's a quiet, kind of tool they pull off the shelf that they can use, find the suspect and then put it back and then not tell anybody, not that they don't tell anybody, they just don't want it like all that publicized because they don't want people pulling back from participating in that.
Yeah, the next show I want to do is Bobby Chacon. I want to know where your ancestry goes to because I think that would be really interesting. Chris McDonough, thanks for all your help. Bobby Chacon, thank you as well. Great to see you both. Still to come, what happens if the defense is successful and the DNA is suppressed?
Law enforcement may or may not have used databases that they had the right to access.
So this is where the defense appears to be going when it comes to the DNA, is that they're saying they may have used data that they're not permitted to use to tie this defendant and to arrest this defendant and to tie him.
It's called fruit from the poisonous branch. They can't use information that they obtained illegally, or that information needs to be thrown out. That's what that's known as, fruit from the poisonous branch, or fruit from the poisonous.
To the knife sheath, the DNA that was found on the snap on the knife sheath. They may have used data that they weren't supposed to use. They want it all revealed. And ultimately what they want is they want the DNA suppressed, not admissible, which brings us to the next question in our investigation, which is, what happens if the DNA is suppressed? What if the defense is successful in one of their motions to keep the DNA from being a part of the trial, to keep the DNA away from the jury? Join me, two guys who know Idaho law very, very, very well. The attorney represented Chad Daybell, John Pryor, and trial lawyer and former Idaho Attorney General Dave Leroy. All right, John, what's your analysis of this case if, in fact, the DNA is gone and they can't connect the suspected killer to this knife sheath that was found at the crime scene?
Well, I think, Vinny, what they're talking about is the IgG evidence and excluding that in terms of the databases that they used. And in that case, that's just that evidence is really evidence of exclusion. What they're trying to do is pull away as many people as they can from that to do that. If it's excluded, it's a part. I mean, the defense is doing.
If it's excluded, that would make them throw the rest of the DNA evidence that they got as a result of that DNA evidence that they got from a third party. The rest of the DNA evidence would also be thrown out, because if that's thrown out, they didn't have the reasons or the proof they needed to make the father give his DNA or get the father to give his DNA, and they wouldn't have the proof needed to follow up with getting Kohberger's DNA, because they wouldn't have had any reason to think that it was them, pretty much. So, I mean, it does a lot if the case gets thrown away, in my opinion, But I haven't finished law school. I just practice law on my own.
Doing it because it's just one more piece that they can not have to worry about or address that might implicate their client. If we're talking about the blood evidence, I think that's huge. I think it's a huge issue if the blood evidence is excluded.
So, Dave Leroy, if you can't connect the defendant to something that was found at the crime scene in this case, which was the knife sheath, if you can't make that direct connection, if you are somehow denied the ability to do that by some of this pretrial litigation, a lot of which is under seal, how strong is this prosecution case? How difficult will it be to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt?
Well, this case is still provable beyond a reasonable doubt, but the most significant evidence in the case is the knife sheath, which was not only evident with the DNA, but it was found under the body of one of the victims and under a cover that was adjacent to her body. Therefore, it was probably...
I'll be honest, just what I've heard about this case, in my opinion, and like I said, I haven't finished law school. I do have some cases that I practice on my own, take care of my own cases. I've won some cases and stuff like that. I do know a little bit about the law anyway, and I know about some of the rules to evidence and how that works. So, I mean, from what I know, if that DNA evidence gets thrown out, the rest of it is also circumstantial. It won't matter. Driving a white Hyundai, that's not really anything serious. And turning off your phone, last I checked, I can do whatever I want with my phone. And I don't have to ask the police permission to turn it on or off or any of that. And me turning my phone off at the time that a murder happened in my state probably doesn't make me guilty of that murder. I mean, it's just ridiculous to think it would, and that wasn't even his state. He was technically across state lines, so I don't see how turning off your phone would mean anything. And driving a white Hyundai, that really doesn't mean much either. I mean, unless if they did have some license plate information. I know the person who called it into the police said that he had a Pennsylvania license plate. I don't know why that would have been significant, unless if the police were looking for a white Hyundai with a Pennsylvania license plate. Then it would make his car a little bit more suspicious than what it was. But anyway, let's keep going, guys.
Left when it was covered up at the scene to tie any individual to that scene, and that particular knife sheath is the most singular significant piece of evidence in the case. If that should be lost, and I don't think it will be at the trial level, if that should be lost, then it still is a circumstantial case that I think the prosecutor can prove.
Notice he said at the trial level. So he thinks that it might get thrown away later, like at appeals. So just because he might be found guilty now, and they might allow this evidence now, doesn't mean it won't be appealed. And that's probably a reason that they would have to appeal, I would think.
But the whole effort here, I believe, is not to win a trial, but it's to create a brand new constitutional right to a privacy protection under the U.S. Constitution for the GNA of third parties, including relatives. If you can argue that you somehow have a privacy interest in that, and you can therefore independently suppress that kind of evidence at a trial, then they've created a whole new area of constitutional law. That's where we're headed with these arguments. I don't expect an Idaho judge at the trial level to buy into that. I wouldn't expect the Idaho Supreme Court to find that to be valid, but it will be presented one day, I presume, should a conviction be had in this case, to the United States Supreme Court. That's where they want to head. This case is capable of conviction without the evidence, but that's the reason we're having such a fight about the knife sheath.
He just contradicted himself. He said that was the most significant evidence. So if it is gone, then how would they be able to convict him? Just because he drives a white Honda? That doesn't seem like it's real evidence to me. Not anything that would single him out to the point where I would think he is guilty. And that's what I mean when I said sometimes it seems like the media is weaponized. But actually, this ended up being a really good show. I don't think it was too much of weaponization going on. I actually think Vinny did a pretty good job with this one. Good job, Vinny. Let's keep going, though.
It weakens the prosecution case if it's lost. And if it stays in, it creates an argument against the United States Constitution.
So what would be the impact here, John, potentially, if the defense is right in their assertion that the data that they accessed, they're not entitled to access? They somehow...
Well, I agree with David. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, if they were able to access something that they weren't supposed to access, so what's the impact of that? Is there an impact on this case?
Well, the impact is that evidence, if they used an inappropriate or were inappropriate in accessing a website, the evidence is excluded. I agree with David, this is still a circumstantial case, but obviously if DNA or IgG evidence is excluded because inappropriate actions by law enforcement or others, it makes their case a little harder. And I agree with David as well that it also sets it up not only for an appealable issue that could go on for years, but also setting up the possibility that a higher court would at some point adopt a situation where you're invading people's privacy. And I wholeheartedly agree with what David's assertion there.
So looking at how this case was investigated, and I think I understand it, despite all the things that are sealed. And what the assertion is that they used all these different pieces, but one of the pieces they used to get to the next step, to get the next piece, was this IgG. So if the IgG gets thrown out, do we get into the world, and I'm going to say it, I know it's from law school, but it's for real. We only have a couple seconds here. Is this, and just a yes or no, is it potentially fruit of the poisonous tree that everything that followed must get thrown out, which could throw out the arrest, the probable cause here? Is it, just give me a yes or no, because we're really short on time. David, you first.
You get an A on the bar exam. The fruit of the poisonous tree will be exactly what the defense argues here, to throw out the DNA.
Oh, wow. Does that mean I get an A2 gas? He just used the phrase I use, fruit from the poisonous branch.
If there is a constitutional right of privacy in someone else's DNA.
All right. We're out of time for tonight, but you know I'm going to be calling on both of you throughout this case. So don't make any plans for late summer, early fall. John Pryor, Dave Leroy, thanks so much. Pretrial litigation is...
Hey, overall, I think Vinny did a good job. I actually thought it was going to be weaponized way harder than it was, so I have to give him some credit. Court TV, too. They did a pretty good job on that one, guys. I'd have to hear what MSNBC and CNN are saying. It's probably not the same type of coverage, for sure. But anyway, guys, I hope you guys found this interesting. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share this with one of your friends, one of your liberal friends especially, so they'll cry about it for the next 17, 20 years, whatever, and we can collect their liberal tears and enjoy them. Anyway, guys, I'm out, and I hope you enjoyed it.